If you are old enough to remember the internet before it was the internet with a capital I, you probably remember the sound.
Oh yeah, that sound.
Right. It wasn't just a noise. It was this screeching, static-filled banshee scream of a modem handshaking over copper phone lines.
It was incredibly grating.
And loud.
It was so loud. But, you know, for a certain generation of men, that wasn't noise at all. That was the sound of freedom.
Absolutely.
It was the sound of entering a world before algorithms, before corporate moderators, and definitely before HR departments decided what you're actually allowed to say.
It was the Wild West, essentially. No
Yeah.
guardrails, no safety nets. Just a blinking cursor and the person on the other end of the line.
Exactly. And today, we are doing a deep dive into a book that argues we didn't just, lose a piece of technology when we moved on from that era. We actually lost an entire mode of existence.
We really did. We're looking at the ebook called Bulletin Board Systems,
Okay.
or BBS, The First Last Good Forums for Men by Conrad Riker. And this is a fascinating and, frankly, it's a very heavy read. So I want to set the stage here for you. If you're listening to this and you feel like the modern internet has just become this neutered, joyless wasteland where you have to walk on eggshells constantly.
Which a lot of people do.
Right. If that's you, this deep dive is specifically for you. Riker is laying out a real manifesto here. He's arguing that our institutions were effectively captured by feminist and Marxist ideologies that are fundamentally hostile to traditional masculinity.
And he uses the history of the BBS to show us the blueprint for getting that digital sovereignty back.
He does. But before we get into the Genesis Code or the restoration protocols, we need to make something really clear to you, the listener.
Right, the disclaimer.
Yeah. We are going to explore the arguments exactly as Riker presents them. Some of this is going to challenge the mainstream narrative significantly, but we are absolutely not endorsing any of the political viewpoints here, left or right. We are simply trying to impartially convey the ideas contained in the original source material.
Exactly. We're just the messengers unpacking the text.
So, a quick bit of housekeeping before we get into the heavy-hitting stuff. If you appreciate this kind of unfiltered analysis where we don't shy away from the controversial topics, please like and subscribe to the show right now.
It really helps us keep bringing you these deep dives.
It does. And honestly, we are going to give you the highlights today, but you really need to read the full manifesto to get the complete picture. You should buy the ebook immediately on Amazon Kindle or Google Play Books.
And for his ongoing analysis that doesn't make it into the book, you need to follow the author at Conrad Riker on Substack. That's at ConradNriker on Substack.
Okay, so let's unpack this. Riker starts us off not in a server room, but in a literal blizzard.
Chicago, 1978.
Yeah.
This is what he calls the Genesis Code. It's the story of Ward Christensen.
Right.
He's trapped indoors by this massive snowstorm, the kind that just completely shuts down a city. He can't get out, nobody can get in.
Right.
So he writes the code for the first computerized bulletin board system, the CBBS.
But Riker's point here isn't just about the code itself.
No, it's about the culture that the code created. Because it was raw. It was totally unfiltered. It was men connecting with other men to solve technical problems.
The book puts a huge emphasis on the fact that this was not a social network.
Not at all.
It was a utility.
A pure utility. And the most important thing, really, the only thing that mattered was competence. Riker calls this the meritocracy matrix.
The meritocracy matrix, I love that term.
Because in the BBS era, nobody cared who you were, what you looked like, or how you identified. They definitely didn't care about your feelings. They only cared if your code worked.
If you could contribute, you were in.
And if you couldn't, you were just noise.
Which brings us to the central figure in this whole ecosystem, the sysop, the system operator.
Riker describes the sysop as a literal king of his domain. And you have to contrast this with modern safety teams or content moderators on social media today.
Right, the outsourced employees following a corporate script.
Exactly. The CSOP owned the hardware. He paid the actual phone bill. So his word was absolute law. There was no appeal process.
There is this hilarious, yet totally brutal anecdote in the book about the duct tape punishment. This is in 1984 Chicago. I had to read this section twice to believe it.
It sounds like an urban legend, doesn't it? But he cites it as a pivotal example of the culture. You had this script kiddie, basically a young hacker, using someone else's tools, who kept crashing a specific board just for kicks.
Now, in today's world, you'd report him.
Right. Maybe he'd get a temporary ban or you'd file a complaint with his ISP. It's all highly bureaucratic.
You fill out an online form.
Back then, there were no forms. 3 CZOPs tracked his phone line, found him at a payphone near his high school, and literally duct taped his Commodore 64 to the basketball hoop in the school gym.
Which is wild, because to a modern ear, that sounds like assault. It sounds like straight-up bullying.
It does sound like that. But
Yeah.
Riker argues that this physical link between action and consequence is exactly what kept the culture honest.
Right, it wasn't about bullying the weak.
It was about maintaining standards. He tells these stories about Dragon Lord, this CSUP, who would ruthlessly mock users for line noise.
Which was basically bad connections or garbage text on the screen.
Yeah. And Dragon Lord wasn't doing it just to be mean, he did it to force them to fix their gear so the network ran better for everyone else.
It reminds me of the whereas boards he mentions. You couldn't just log on and take files, you had to upload quality stuff to get credit to download anything.
Pure transaction based on value. That is the core of the meritocracy matrix. You had to provide value to exist in the space.
Wow.
And Riker heavily contrasts this with the modern coddling of users.
He points out that flame wars, those really intense, heated arguments online, they weren't toxic, they were stress tests for ideas.
Yes.
He cites the Philadelphia Fight-A-Net hub. This blew my mind. They coordinated disaster relief during a blizzard when the actual city services failed.
Because they didn't have a committee, they didn't have a diversity and inclusion statement to review.
They didn't stop to ask if everyone felt hurt.
Exactly. They just had a group of guys who knew how to route data and get things done. Pure efficiency born out of a total lack of niceness.
And that actually leads us directly into what is probably the most controversial and definitely the most scientifically dense part of the book, segment 2, which is biological hardwiring.
Riker makes a very strong pivot here.
He really does. He argues that the BBS wasn't just a piece of software. He says it was a digital expression of male biology.
This is where the text moves from tech history into evolutionary psychology. He introduces this concept called the feelings firewall.
Let's break that down for the listener. What exactly is the feelings firewall?
Well, the core argument Riker makes is that biology dictates fundamentally different roles for men and women, and that institutions fail when they try to ignore this reality.
He claims men are evolutionarily hardwired to prioritize the objective mission over the emotional atmosphere of the group.
Right. And he cites historical data with this. He looks at Sparta versus Athens, showing how specialized male aggression led to dominance. But he also brings in anthropological data.
The hunter-gatherer studies.
Yes, the Kung San and the Ache hunters.
Basically pointing to the data showing that men provided the vast majority of calories and physical protection through high-risk behavior.
Correct. And he argues that this high-risk behavior is chemically driven. The book cites neuroscience research out of Cambridge regarding testosterone and spatial reasoning.
The idea that men are hardwired to build bridges, literal and metaphorical structures, while women are hardwired to build consensus.
That's his thesis. And he argues that when you try to swap those roles in high-stakes environments, you get severe inefficiency or outright disaster.
And he uses some incredibly high-stakes examples to back this up. Apollo 13 is a huge one in the text.
Gene Kranz's team. Riker dissects the actual mission transcripts. He points out it was an all-male team making rapid-fire life-or-death decisions. Failure is not an option.
There was absolutely no time for checking in on everyone's emotional state.
None. If someone had stopped the room to ask, "How is this crisis making you feel?" the astronauts would have died. And Riker contrasts this directly with the 2010 Chilean miners' rescue.
That story is incredible. Luis Urzúa.
The foreman, yes. He kept 33 men alive underground for 69 days. And he didn't do it by running a democracy.
Right.
He used a strict military-style hierarchy. He rationed the food, he assigned the duties, and he maintained order through command.
And then Riker contrasts that survival story with the Andes flight disaster.
Where a much more democratic, less hierarchical approach led to absolute chaos and, well, cannibalism.
It is a brutal comparison, but it makes his point effectively. And then he brings up the Swedish factory experiment, which I had never even heard of before reading this.
It's a fascinating case study. This is a factory that intentionally introduced gender-balanced management teams specifically to promote equality.
And according to the data Riker presents, productivity just dropped significantly.
Right. The argument is that the feelings firewall, that ability to shut out emotion and focus purely on the objective reality of the task, is a masculine trait that is absolutely essential for innovation and crisis management.
When you introduce the need for consensus and emotional safety, the entire machine just slows down.
And he claims modern corporate inclusion initiatives are actively destroying this capability across the board.
He mentions Google's Project Aristotle data being buried because it didn't fit the desired corporate narrative.
The claim there is that the internal data showed high-performing teams were very often male-dominated and aggressive. But because that violated the psychological safety mandate of their HR department, the findings were suppressed.
Riker calls this the censorship ice age. We prioritize emotional safety over the brutal truth that is required for things like aerospace engineering or deep-sea mining.
Which brings us perfectly to the double bind.
Yes, the double bind. This is something I think a lot of men listening to this deep dive have felt personally in their own lives. Society constantly demands that you open up, right? You're told to be vulnerable.
But the second you actually do it,
You get punished.
Riker calls it the double bind algorithms. He cites multiple workplace studies showing that men who cry at work are viewed as significantly less competent by their peers.
Whereas women might be viewed as more authentic for doing the same thing.
Exactly. But it's even starker in the data regarding leadership. Ruthless men, he uses Elon Musk as the archetype here, get promoted and funded. Men who are perceived as soft do not.
And the divorce court statistics in the book were just jaw-dropping.
The vulnerability paradox. He cites stats showing mothers winning custody 86% of the time.
But the real nuance he points out is how fathers are treated on the stand.
Right, fathers who try to be vulnerable in court, admitting to stress or depression, or saying they are struggling with a process, they lose custody for being unstable.
Meanwhile, fathers who remain totally stoic lose for being cold and unfeeling.
It is a totally lose-lose scenario engineered by the system.
And it extends to dating, too. The Occupid and Tinder data he pulls is brutal.
It highlights the difference between revealed preference and stated preference. Women will state on surveys that they want emotional vulnerability.
But the actual swipe data shows they systematically reject sensitive profiles.
They reject them in favor of displays of status, stoicism, and physical competence.
Riker actually calls this the Atlas penalty.
The idea that men are expected to carry the entire world on their shoulders. He notes that 93% of workplace deaths are men.
Men are the ones out on the oil rigs, the high power lines, driving the logging trucks.
They build and carry the physical infrastructure of civilization. But they are simultaneously demonized as toxic for having the exact traits like aggression and risk-taking that allow them to do those dangerous jobs in the first place.
So how did we get here? Because the book traces what he calls the system crash. The BBS era obviously didn't last forever.
Riker pins the beginning and the end on the mid-90s, specifically the rise of AOL in 1996.
That was the big shift.
It went from the wild west of the BBS, where you had to actually know some code to even get in the door, to the walled garden, where everything was easy, consumer-friendly, and heavily moderated.
Then came the CDA, the Communications Decency Act.
That was the first real glacier of the censorship ice age.
And right alongside that, the massive expansion of HR departments.
Riker argues that the nice guys policies of the 90s directly evolved into the algorithmic shadow banning we see today.
It mutated from simply don't be a jerk into don't express a conservative or traditionally masculine viewpoint.
And he argues that the institutions were captured precisely because men voluntarily surrendered the gatekeeping role. They let the cis-ep be replaced by the moderator.
So that is the diagnosis, and honestly, it is bleak. But the back half of the book is entirely about solutions. He outlines the restoration protocols.
He talks heavily about logic warfare. How does a man actually fight back in an environment like this?
It's very tactical. He is teaching the reader how to win arguments in a completely rigged system.
One major tactic is selective silence and using primary sources as armor. He calls this building a rationality firewall.
Meaning you don't engage with the emotional premise of an argument.
Right. If someone says to you, "That's offensive," you do not apologize. You bombard the opponent with hard, objective data.
I really liked his boomerang method.
That is where you take a social construct argument and you hit it squarely with biological reality.
For example, if someone argues that gender disparities in construction jobs are entirely due to systemic sexism.
Riker suggests citing the 40% upper body strength difference between men and women, alongside the severe workplace injury rates.
You use the biological reality to completely dismantle the sociological claim. You don't argue opinions, you argue biology.
But he stresses it's not just about winning arguments on Twitter. It's about rebuilding the actual architecture of our communications.
This is the technical side of his manifesto. Riker is a huge proponent of decentralization.
He argues men need to aggressively move away from corporate platforms like Facebook, Reddit, and Twitter.
And move back to encrypted, self-hosted servers.
He references FidoNet, which was the old decentralized BBS network, but he points to modern equivalents like Mastodon forks or secure encrypted chat protocols.
Encryption is absolutely key here. He mentions Phil Zimmerman's victory with PGP.
Pretty good privacy. Back in the 90s, the government actually tried to classify encryption code as a munition. They treated it like a literal missile.
And Zimmerman fought back against that and won.
Riker says we need to treat our personal data with that exact same level of seriousness today. Refuse to trade your privacy for convenience.
Because if you are using a free platform, you are the product and you are actively being censored.
There was this one comparison in the book that I found totally fascinating. The Amish approach.
Yes. It sounds so counterintuitive for a high-tech manifesto, but when he explains it, it makes perfect sense.
The Amish don't reject technology because they are stupid or ignorant. They reject it if it doesn't serve their community values. They vet the tech.
And Riker argues men should do the exact same thing today.
So it's all about strict intentionality.
Right. Using a CNC mill to build something physical,
Yes.
that serves competence. It builds the real world.
But doom scrolling on social media, no. That is what he calls vampiric.
It drains your testosterone and your attention span without giving you a single thing of value in return.
Riker says men need to be utterly ruthless about cutting out any technology that makes them weak.
Which leads right into his concept of future-proof masculinity. We have to talk about the action schematics.
He breaks this down into a triangle model. The 3 points are scarcity, skill, and tribal validation.
Meaning you need to be in a group where status is genuinely scarce and is only earned through demonstrable skill.
You cannot just be accepted merely for existing. You have to earn your spot at the table through action.
And physicality is a huge part of that. He keeps coming back to this imagery of calloused hands.
He contrasts the working Montana ranchers he spent time with against the modern participation trophy generation.
His point is that you cannot have digital sovereignty if you don't first possess physical sovereignty.
You need to be capable in the real world. If the power grid goes down tomorrow, can you survive?
Because if you can't, your digital opinions simply do not matter.
It all circles back to the John Wayne paradox.
Exactly. Society constantly sends the message that male aggression is toxic and bad.
Yet society relies entirely on men who are capable of violence and protection to keep the lights on and keep the borders safe.
So Riker's ultimate advice is to just ignore the noise. Stop apologizing for your nature.
Build real value and actively create unapologetic zones of pure meritocracy.
Unapologetic zones. I really love that phrasing.
It's about creating spaces where the since-up mentality finally returns. You don't wait for a corporate moderator to save you or dictate your speech.
You moderate your own life in your own immediate community. You become the king of your own domain again.
This book, Bulletin Board Systems, is really pitched as a cultural antivirus. That is exactly how Riker describes it.
It's a manual for the red-pilled man who sees the glitch in the matrix and just absolutely refuses to play along anymore.
And it leaves the reader with a massive, unavoidable question.
Yeah.
The world is collapsing into what Riker calls collaborative chaos.
Which begs the final provocation for you, the listener. If the digital world was captured because we voluntarily gave up our own servers, what happens next? What happens when brain-computer interfaces or augmented reality are controlled by those exact same institutions?
Are you going to let them moderate your literal reality?
Will you be the one waiting for a safety committee to save you, or will you be the sysop who builds the new kingdom?
That really is the question you have to answer.
It is, and if you want the full blueprint to answer it, and we have truly just scratched the surface of this text today, you need to get this book.
Go to Amazon Kindle, go to Google Playbooks, and search for Bulletin Board Systems by Conrad Riker.
Buy it immediately. Read the full manifesto.
And do not forget to follow him for his latest updates and real-time analysis at Conrad Riker on Substack. The writing there is ongoing, it's incisive, and it is completely uncensored.
And finally, if you got value out of this deep dive today, please like and subscribe to our show. We want to keep bringing you this kind of hard-hitting, unfiltered content, and your support is what makes that possible.
We really appreciate it.
Thanks for listening. We will see you on the next deep dive.